Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription. Let's get started.
So, this is something that I guess, a lot of people fear, because when you tell them about the value builder system and when you walk them through this, I'm pretty certain you must have also come across something similar wherein they have this, they hold back to it, well, as much as they want to do. So how
Yeah,
do you
I think it comes down to, are you hawking hours or are you building a company? Hawking hours, and I don't mean to be so pejorative, but effectively, if you're just selling other people's time, you
Right.
really have a traditional professional services firm. And
Right.
as soon as those professionals reach a degree of experience, they will demand equity of you. They will say, I will leave unless you make me a partner in a law firm, as an example. Same thing as an accounting firm. I have so much sway over these clients that if you're going to be on your boat or in your ski chalet and just carve off all the profit, I'm not game for that. I'm going to leave. That's the problem with running a professional services firm. And that's why they're generally not very valuable, and the partners don't really get rich. They make a great living, but they don't ever get rich because they've got to keep sharing equity as soon as employees reach a certain level of experience. Contrast that with an accounting firm owner who builds a business, not a practice.
Yes.
The guy's name is Darren Root. I don't know if you've ever had Darren on the show.
No. Welcome to Accounting M&A Insider, where we bring you behind the scenes of the M&A world in the accounting industry. I'm your host, Saul, and today's episode is all about one of the biggest questions a firm owner can ask. How can I make my business something a buyer actually wants? My guest today is John Warrillow, the founder of the Value Builder System, a powerful platform used by advisors and accounting firms to help business owners grow and eventually harvest the value in their business. John is also the best-selling author of Built to Sell, The Automatic Customer, and The Art of Selling. So if you are an accounting firm owner thinking about selling one day, or just trying to build something that doesn't depend entirely on you, you're going to want to take notes. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Saul. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. For many of our listeners, they probably know you from Built to Sell, but for those who don't, would you mind telling us what inspired you to focus your career in helping entrepreneurs build more sellable businesses?
It goes back to a meeting I had in Toronto with a guy named Perry Miele. So I was running a professional services firm. Like a lot of your listeners, I had the assets going up and down the elevators every night. We worked in market intelligence, and I built it up to about 6 million in revenue, 25% EBITDA margins. It was a good business. I thought it would be a very valuable company. We had great clients, Microsoft, IBM, and others. And I went to see this guy, Perry Miele, who's an M&A professional in Toronto. And I said, look, what do you think it's worth? And he said, before I answer that question, let me ask you a couple. I said, shoot. And he said, okay, like, who does the selling? And I was like, well, I got to do some of the selling. It's IBM, Microsoft. He's like, all right, well, who does the research? Who offers the service? And I'm like, well, I oversee it. And I kind of observe. And he said, John, there's nothing for me to sell here. I can't sell this business. It's worthless.
Yeah.
And I had gone into that meeting, Saul, thinking my company was an incredibly valuable asset, rubbing my hands together, thinking what it would be worth. And I left feeling an inch tall, realizing I'd made a lot of mistakes. And so that triggered for me a journey. I hired Perry. I hired some other advisors. Over time, we put in a subscription model focused on recurring revenue, got me out of doing the selling, hired a head of research. Ultimately, it was acquired by Gartner Group, the big publicly traded New York Stock Exchange listed company. So it had a happy ending. But
Yeah.
leaving Perry's office was one of those seminal moments for me where I realized I needed to change. And that I think is the impetus between, for a lot of the stuff that we do today at Value Builder.
No, no, I think what the epiphany that you went through, a lot of the firms currently, like everybody is building a business, and they know that they got a great firm, and everybody's in that mindset that, okay, I've got great clients, everything is going good, my revenue is good. So they do feel that, okay, when that point comes for me to sell my business, I'm sure I would be doing good. But it's only when we come across this and we realize that, oh, there's a lot that I've not taken into consideration. Like you mentioned about, how much you were so much involved into so many critical processes without you realizing that that's something that a buyer would not look at it from a favorable standpoint. Because when a buyer is looking to acquire a business, they're looking to acquire a business wherein they are not required to invest too much of their time into managing it. So these are like very fundamental things that apply whether someone is just 2 years into the exit or 10. I think it's just a powerful reframe. But you know you we are before we get into the value builder system, which is a very, very beautiful product, and I know you got like a lot of things built out. I'm not going to be talking about everything in it, but like if you were to be giving me a high level overview of probably one or two things that are built into the value builder system that can really help firm owners to realize where they are and how they can scale, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, listeners to your show can wear two hats, right? Because they're owners of an accounting firm, and as I walk you through these sort of drivers, they can think in their own firms, like how would this apply to my professional services firm? But equally, they are the most trusted advisor many times of their clients, these small business owners that they work with. And those small business owners can also benefit from understanding these drivers. So I hope that your listeners will wear two hats: one, their own firm, but two, that of a trusted advisor of a lot of small businesses. And to answer your question, probably the number one driver of value for an accounting firm, and virtually all small businesses for that matter, is recurring revenue.
Okay.
And you'll notice I use the term recurring revenue as opposed to reoccurring revenue. There is a subtlety and an important difference between the two. Recurring
Uh-huh.
revenue is contractual, right? Where you're an accounting firm and you say, hey, we're going to bill you X amount per month for perpetuity or for the year, whatever. Reoccurring revenue is when a customer comes back to you on some sort of sporadic cadence. Both are valuable to acquirers, but recurring revenue is much more valuable. So accounting firms obviously can structure their agreements with clients so that they say, hey, instead of just doing your audit once a year and billing you once at the end of the year, let's say that we're going to advise you over time. So that's a model that most accounting firms have moved to, and that's going to generate a lot of recurring revenue and a lot of value for the businesses. That's probably number one on the list. The other one is one that you referred to earlier, which is hub and spoke, which is really where I scored very low in my professional services firm tenure. Hub and spoke is where you are the kind of epicenter of the business, right? So if you think about it, if you've ever flown through Chicago O'Hare or London Heathrow in a snowstorm or some sort of weather event, those hubs work really efficiently until something breaks, and then the entire transportation system breaks down. And so similarly, a lot of businesses are very efficient with the owner in the hub of the hub and spoke model right up until the moment the owner gets sick, goes on
Yes.
vacation, has a commitment, and then those businesses get very inefficient. So again, that having a high hub and spoke score, in other words, not being in the epicenter of your business, can be a very valuable aspect of it for potential acquirers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you I think if your business can run without you, I guess you win, whether you're thinking to sell now or not. I mean, isn't that the kind of freedom that most owners are actually after? I mean,
Yeah,
to have.
absolutely. Yeah. We called it in Built to Sell, I called it the options strategy, not to be confused with stock options, but the idea of optionality, meaning if you've got a business that can thrive without you, if you have an accounting firm that's not dependent on you, I mean, you're in the catbird seat. You've got the ultimate poker hand in the game of life, right? So you could sell it at a moment's notice if you wanted to. You could bring in the next generation of managers and know that they are going to have a successful transition because it's not dependent on you.
Right.
You could choose to simply become the chairman of your firm and let another generation of managers run it while you continue to own it. Regardless of your ultimate goal, having a business that's not dependent on you creates, I think, optionality, which is the ideal sort of outcome for virtually anybody.
Yeah. And you mentioned about recurring revenue as being one of the key factors. Why is that? Why recurring revenue? I mean, like, how does it factor into the valuation from a buyer's perspective?
Yeah, like when you think about a buyer's perspective, and I would encourage everybody to kind of wear their acquirer's hat when they think about their own business and say, well, what would I want if I was buying an accounting firm, as an example? And I think the number one thing that you would want is customers under contract, right? Because the fear you would have if you were buying a small accounting firm is, are those customers loyal to the firm or to the founder? That's really the essence of valuation, right? Like if that founder retires, if that accounting firm partner leaves, are those customers going to leave with him or her? And if the answer to that is yes, the company's worthless.
Yeah.
By contrast, if there is loyalty that accrues to the firm, not the founder, then that's a valuable firm. And so with recurring revenue, you're contractually engaging those customers over a long period of time to be loyal to the firm, not the partner. And that's why recurring revenue is such an incredibly important element to any accounting firm. But again, it goes beyond accounting firms. I mean, you can look at virtually any business.
Right.
Um, Recurring revenue is going to make it much more valuable than one-off transactional revenue.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's all about cash flow, right? I mean, you want to have a consistent cash flow coming in because if you're going to be buying a business, if I was thinking it from a buyer standpoint, you are right. I would want to buy a business wherein whatever revenue they are making, I would want those revenue streams to consistently happen instead
Yeah,
of
yeah.
falling.
Acquirers are all trying to de-risk. Like that's their whole headspace, right? They're trying to de-risk, and recurring revenue helps them de-risk.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE One to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
You mentioned about the buyers being able to. I mean, like, sorry, not the buyers, but the sellers to be able to be in a position wherein they are able to be independent and the business is able to run without them, like that freedom that we talked about, right? And this is something that I have also spoken to a couple of people, and there is a hesitation that comes from them. And one of the top hesitations that they have is that when they have the employees be working too closely with the clients, over time, the employees tend to develop that close relationship with that client. I mean, they kind of have a sway over the client and that relationship. So the buyer kind of feels that he goes into the backseat, and if it were to come to the point wherein he has to finally exit, he faces that fear that the acquiring firm may not be able to hold on to those clients because the employees may leave, and with them they could take away the clients that they've been regularly engaged with because the clients have become too comfortable dealing with those reps, those customer
Hmm.
relationship managers and everything. So this is something that I guess a lot of people fear, because when you tell them about the value builder system and when you walk them through this, I'm pretty certain you must have also come across something similar wherein they have this, they hold back to it, well, as much as
Yeah,
they want to hold. So how
yeah.
do
I
you
think it.
achieve that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to: are you hawking hours? Or are you building a company? Hawking hours, and I don't mean to be so pejorative, but effectively, if you're just selling other people's time, you
Right,
really have a traditional professional services firm. And
right,
as soon as those professionals reach a degree of experience, they will demand equity of you. They will say, I will leave unless you make me a partner in a law firm, as an example. Same thing as an accounting firm. I have
yeah,
so much sway over these clients that if you're going to be on your boat or in your ski chalet and just carve off all the profit, I'm not game for that. I'm going to leave. That's
Yeah.
the problem with running a professional services firm. And that's
Yeah.
why they're generally not very valuable. And the partners don't really get rich. They make a great living, but they don't ever get rich because they've got to keep sharing equity as soon as employees reach a certain level of experience.
Mhm.
Contrast that with an accounting firm owner who builds a business, not a practice. The
Yes.
guy's name is Darren Root. I don't know if you've ever had Darren on the show.
No, I mean, I've not been fortunate yet, but I'm hopeful I will one day.
Okay, so Bloomington, Indiana-based accounting firm. Darren doesn't want to own a practice. He wants to own a business. And what he does early is he starts segmenting his customers. And he says, like, who are the customers that we do business with well, that we can really add value for, et cetera. And he realizes it's medical practices. So dentists, optometrists, et cetera. And he starts to interview those firms, those medical practices, and say, like, what do you need from an accounting firm? And what they need is effectively a back office support person.
Right.
They don't want to have a full-time FTE sitting in the back office worrying about billing. Like it's just, most of those businesses are too small to warrant a salary, 70, 80, $90,000 a year just to basically run billing, right? But it's it's a pain point. And
Yeah.
so what Darren did was first decide he's going to become the world's best accounting firm at helping medical practices segment. The second thing he did was productize his service.
Uh-huh.
Productizing a service means you take hourly billing or service businesses and you make it look like they're buying a product. And the product he sold those medical practices is called BOSS, Back Office Support System, wherein they effectively become the back office for those medical practices. So it's a very easy sell. They say, look, you've got two choices, Mr. Optometrist or Mrs. Dentist or whatever. You can, one, hire for $80,000 a year a bookkeeper and have them on salary, or for $2,000 or $3,000 a month, you can engage BOSS. And with BOSS, we effectively become your back office. What has he
Gotcha.
done in doing that? Number one, he's productized his service. Number two, no one's buying Darren Root at that point. They're buying into his system, the back office support system. It's
Correct.
a productized service, and it divorces him from the delivery of the service. Equally, his employees are no longer building these like bonds that they can hold hostage, like they can hold Darren hostage because they're loyal to boss. And effectively, those employees become interchangeable. As long as
Right.
that customer is buying the back office support system, whether it's Jane or Johnny who's doing the actual work is irrelevant. They're loyal to boss. It's a
Wow.
huge headspace change for most professional services firms, which are in the business of hawking time. And again,
Yeah.
they become dependent on very, very, junior employees become more senior. Senior employees say, I want equity, and they get diluted, and you end up having a nice life, but not building wealth. And so it's a different mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And wow, I mean, like this is phenomenal. This idea of productizing, it can probably sound intimidating to a lot of folks, but it actually makes a lot of sense. You are shifting that focus from that individual to that service, and the clients are driven towards the service, not on the person who is doing the service.
Yeah,
And
exactly. And one of the other benefits of productizing in an accounting firm is that people are socialized. If you think about
Mhm.
your own behavior, we are socialized to buy products and pay for them up front.
Correct.
Whereas services are usually rendered and then paid for. So, for
Correct.
example, I had a guy pitch me on cleaning the windows in my home the other day.
Uh-huh.
And his deal was basically, we'll come in, we'll clean your windows, and then we'll send you an invoice and
Uh-huh.
pay us your invoice 30 days, 45 days later. That's a classic service model.
Yeah.
Whereas if I go to Costco and I take an 8-pack of paper towel, Bounty paper towel off the shelf, I don't expect to use the paper towel and then pay for it. I expect to pay for it and then use it. That's the difference between buying a product and buying a service. And so if you productize your service, as Darren has done with Boss, you can start charging up front. You can say, hey, we charge $3,000 a month for this. When do you want to get started? We'll bill you in the first of the month. boom, positive cash flow cycle. Whereas by contrast, if you're hawking time, we have to know, well, how many hours did they work on it? And did Jimmy work on it and Sally work on it? And all of a sudden you've got a negative cash flow cycle. You're getting paid 30, 60, 90 days later. So productizing also has the benefit of improving your cash flow and making it a positive, not a negative cash flow cycle.
Wow. Wow. You put it so well. You put it so well. And you mentioned about, practice and business, because I think these are two terms that, a lot of people are using it interchangeably, but they're a lot different, right? There's a difference between running a practice and running a business, So
yeah, there is. And the valuation multiple. Yeah. So the valuation multiples tend to be lower for practices because they are perceived to be a collection of individuals for whom clients are loyal to the individuals. The other thing I would tell you, Saul, is that practices are bought with an earnout. Earnout is the enemy for any entrepreneur, right? So an earnout is a stipulation that says, hey, we're going to pay you 4 times EBITDA for your accounting firm. I'm just making this up. And yet we're not going to pay you that up front. We're going to pay you 50% of that number up front. And then the other 50% you're going to have to earn over 3-5 years. And by the way, if you lose a client or your EBITDA drops or you don't grow at the rate we hope you will, you won't get that earnout. So it's effectively at risk. And practices, professional services firms in particular, but practices in general, are usually acquired with an earnout. And when most founders want to leave, they want to leave, right? Whereas most acquirers will try to lock an accounting firm practice owner, effectively a partner, in with an earnout. Now, I'm not suggesting that you could sell an accounting firm without an earnout. What I am suggesting is if you do some of the things we're talking about, productizing your service, getting yourself out of the epicenter of the business, creating recurring revenue, the proportion of your deal that's at risk in an earnout may go from 50, 60, 70% down to 5, 10, 15%. That's where you want to be, right? You want it to be a negligible part of your deal, not half, 3/4.
No, I mean, and I completely agree to it. The earnout thing, in fact, I was talking to Jeremy Dubois in one of our webinars on private equity, and he said this, that, earnout is a retention strategy used by, firms because they want to ensure that consistency happens. And it's very beautiful the way you distinguish this, because for a practice owner, why that earnout model is more favorable for a buyer, and when you shift it to a business, why that multiple is better and you're able to get better value for your business. Very well put, very well put, John. I'm totally impressed with this perspective, But, you talked about the buyers and you talked about the recurring revenue. That's really great. And we also talked about the owner dependence. But oftentimes what happens is the owners are not quite realizing it, that, the firm is too much dependent on them. So how can, or maybe, if you can let me know or let our listeners know some early warning signs that a firm is too dependent on its founder.
Yeah, I mean, the classic and the easiest one, it's frankly fun to execute, is go on vacation and just see how things perform when you're out. So, I mean, I'm a big, believer in doing this on a very kind of low risk way. So take a day off middle of the week and just see what happens. Like, does something break? What breaks, right? What are the questions that you come back to the next day that need answering? I did a podcast on Built Sell Radio with a woman named Jody Cook. And Jody was trying to go through this process. She ran a professional services firm like a lot of your listeners. And she was trying to get the business less dependent on her. And she kept an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper by her desk. And every time an employee came to her with a question, she wrote the question down. At the end of the day, instead of just answering the questions, which most of us are kind of knee-jerk reaction to answer, at the end of the day, she took each question and created a standard operating procedure, effectively a rule book or playbook that her employees could follow when she's not there. Wow. And it was that playbook that eventually got her out of the doing inside her business. And so I think you go on vacation for a day and just see what breaks, see what questions come in first thing in the morning. You get in and like, who's knocking on your door with a critical issue that needs to be addressed. Instead of just addressing it, obviously you're going to address it if it's critical, but address it, but then write it down, because that's where you're broken. And then you're just going to extend the time your way. So it take a day, take 3 days, 5 days, take a week, et cetera. And over time, the longer you can be away from your business without things breaking, the more valuable it is as a company.
Wow. Wow. Well, you know, this all is so, I'm pretty certain, this is too much of information. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to have some very valuable insights out of it. But, this is, I guess one of the things that I've noticed is that, people are not really thinking about their exit because if you're a baby boomer, well, you are thinking about an exit. But if you're probably a Gen X or something, you probably not even be thinking about an exit for your practice. I'm saying practice, I'm not saying a business, because I'm not sure if they've actually transitioned into a business model. But for you who has been working with so many people, why is it important for firm owners to think about an exit years in advance, even if they're not planning to sell right now?
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
Yeah, it comes down to the fact that really what you want to build from day one is a valuable company. And if you're not thinking about the end game, like how this all plays out, it can lead you to make investments that have no ROI. I'll give you an example outside of the accounting industry. But years ago, I did an interview with a guy who ran a frozen yogurt company. And he sold his frozen yogurt to Kroger and all the big grocery store chains. And it was a very successful company, but there was a little part of him that always wanted retail stores. Like if you go into a Ben and Jerry's ice cream store and there's that like real vibe where there's young kids and they're having their ice cream and mom and dad are there. And it's a very kind of warm and exceptional experience. And so he kind of craved that. So in addition to having his ice cream, his frozen yogurt business sell kind of through distribution, through retail, he started to set up, through wholesale, he started to set up retail stores. Wow. He built an entire network of retail stores. But as you can imagine, retail stores are very capital intensive, right? You've got to hire locations, you either got to buy or lease space, you got to bring in employees, you got to go through a whole kind of set of things so we had to share equity, to sell equity, to raise the money, to build out his network. But he thought, this is great, we're going to build a more valuable company, et cetera. So he goes from being the 100% owner of a company that was selling frozen yogurt to Kroger to being a minority shareholder in a much bigger business with a bunch of retail outlets. Long story short, he goes to sell the business. Nobody wants it. It's like this weird, ugly duckling. It's kind of like this retail business, but also a wholesale business. Is it a brand? Is it a retailer, et cetera? Nobody wants to buy it. Yeah. Eventually, he gets someone interested in buying it. And when they provide him with the valuation, they say, look, we are going to value the distribution business, the brand, the fact that you've got distribution in the Kroger. But immediately, we're going to shut down your entire retail network. Right? So we're not going to put $1 of value into that. So what has he done? He spent years building out this retail network, number one. Number two, he's diluted himself because he's had to raise capital and sell equity to build out this network. All to the end where it makes no value to the business that he is created. And so he walked away with a fraction of what he would have walked away with had he just said, no, we're a wholesale business, a brand that we're selling through Kroger. It takes knowing what the end game is and what you're trying to do, how your business will be viewed by an acquirer, to really think that through. So I would just encourage anyone, whether they're starting, it was Stephen Covey, one of his 7 habits. You remember the old kind of productivity guru, what kind of the legend in that space. He said, begin with the end in mind. That was one of his 7 goals. So look, whether you're millennial, Gen X or boomer, I think begin with the end in mind. Like, what are you trying to do? Have you got a regional accounting firm? Are you trying to sell it to one of the big 5 or big 4? Okay, great. There's a way to do that. Or are you an independent practitioner and you want to sell to a regional practice in your state? Great. There's a way to structure your business in that way.
Correct.
I think it comes down to what's your end game, knowing what it is, and then building towards that. You don't have to want to sell for decades, but you do need to know like what the end game is.
Absolutely. And you helped so many businesses, scale and get to that point, and they've been sold and everything. But with your experience, because you got so many stories to sell. So I know 1 hour would be too less if I were to ask for so many. But if I were to ask you, like, what are some of the biggest regrets you heard from founders who didn't prepare properly for their exit?
The number one regret we hear, and I'm not just trying to ingratiate myself with your audience, it's all about tax planning. The number one regret we hear is, I wish I'd structured it earlier. I wished I'd talked to my accountant earlier so that I could have made the moves to minimize taxes. And I know that sounds like, such a trivial in many ways regret, but it is the number one regret I hear. So I've done this podcast for 10 years. It's called Built to Sell Radio. We've interviewed a different entrepreneur every week for 10 years. So we've more than 500 episodes. And one of the questions I ask is, what one thing do you wish you had done differently?
Yeah.
And the number one answer I get is, I wished I talked to my accountant sooner. Because they end up selling their business and not appreciating the difference between selling shares and selling assets, for example, or not structuring trusts, or any number of kind of mistakes they made because they were so kind of focused on the deal, they weren't really thinking about the tax implications. So do people regret not selling for more, not negotiating harder, or not paying their employees better? They have all those regrets, right? But the number one regret is, I wished I'd talked to my accountants sooner.
Yep. And this is a line of business that a lot of people are even not looking into, because I know there are some CPAs who are specially focused on this only. They are focused on helping the businesses to grow, just like you are, and you're advising them and you're telling them how they can do it better, which would also mean probably changing the structure of the business. Like the registration, the entity structure, that could also need to be changed. Which brings me to a very interesting question, because in one of my webinars, this is a question from a user that does it make a difference if I'm in a niche industry, like in cannabis or crypto, or if I'm in a niche or real estate, if my customers are in a niche industry, does that really make a difference? And another question that was asked was that, do I need to remain compliant to certain regulatory protocols, like maybe an ISO certification or something? Do I need to have that in place for me to become lucrative to a buyer? Yeah. So what does you say on that?
Yeah, I think industry specialization can really improve the value proposition. And it makes you think about things like ISO 9000 example that you wouldn't if you were more horizontally focused. So do you have to niche down to build an accounting firm that's successful? I don't think so. But if the goal is to build a valuable business that you could sell, I think niching down, as Darren Root has done in medical practices, allows you to create a value proposition for an industry, productize it, and get out of doing the doing. So I think it is one of the most important prerequisites, or one of the first steps to building a more valuable accounting firm, is saying, okay, like, who do we really, really add a lot of value for? What are the industries? What are the types of businesses where we can really shine? And, building out a unique proposition for those types of businesses, I think, does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And this is I ask this question to everybody whom I speak to who has been into the business of buying and selling or helping people. And I'm going to ask you the same question. I know there is no single answer to this, but I'm still going to ask you, because this is the question that everybody asks. What is the multiple?
Yeah. In the accounting industry?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's usually going to be, assuming you have moved to recurring revenue and you've got customers on recurring revenue, it's often going to be a multiple of your recurring revenue. Somewhere between 1 and 1.5 times would be pretty typical of an accounting practice, kind of small to mid-sized accounting practice. That being said, it can vary dramatically. And one of the things I would really encourage your listeners to do is not myopically sort of trade fishing stories with your buddies around what your firm might be worth, because I have seen examples where firms get a fraction of that because they are a firm that is too small, too dependent on the owner, hasn't got recurring revenue, and is just really a sole practitioner. They're not even going to get any really value for that business. Whereas by contrast, I've seen firms like Darren Root's company that can trade at much higher multiples because they've got, again, a business as opposed to a practice. So it's in an effort to try to sort of satiate your desire for an answer, I shared with you an answer. But I wouldn't want people to leave this podcast thinking, okay, I'm preordained to get at least 1 times revenue for my business. No, I don't think that's the case. I think you've really got to do some of the work to start to make your business more valuable if your goal is to ultimately sell it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't really want to. I mean, it's like you said, the multiple. I'm pretty certain that the multiple is dependent on a lot many other factors. You just give like a ballpark idea, but I'm sure there's a lot more. Like sometimes it's also about how the firm is structured and whether it's virtual, or do you meet with all the clients in person, or are they open to the virtual? What kind of a tech setup do you have? The location of the business for that, is there a lease involved, or what is it? Because
Tons of factors, right?
tons of factors, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like sellers are selling equity and buyers are buying assets. So, which is very interesting. And I didn't quite understand it earlier when they said buyers are buying assets. I'm like, why would buyer want to buy assets? But then I got to know that, there's you're able to revalue the assets, and then that way you're able to get more out of the depreciation and all that. But that's a discussion for another podcast. We don't want to get into those nitty-gritties. But as we come towards the end, I just want to, for our listeners, if they wanted to know more about the value builder system, how, or probably to just connect with you, how can they get in touch with you and know more about the value builder system?
Yeah. So Value Builder is a value assessment platform that advisors use to help their clients understand and ultimately build the value of their company. So we license that to accounting firms who use it to start the end game conversation with their clients. The best way to learn more about Value Builder is to go to advisor.valuebuilder.com. And that's where all roads lead to that website. So it's just advisor.valuebuilder.com.
Alrighty. Well, you heard it, folks. Advisor.valuebuilder.com. That's where you gotta go. I'll also have this inputted in the description, so you have it handy. The link is handy, and you can definitely reach out to them. And are you available on LinkedIn?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. So, well, folks, LinkedIn, John Warrillow, that's where you can look it up, or advisor.valuebuilder.com. That's where you can go. So, I've got pages of notes already, and I'm pretty certain our listeners would also be having pages of notes to look into. This has been incredibly clear and empowering. So thank you, John, for sharing your wisdom.
Thanks, Saul. It was good to be with you.
Yes, and thank you for joining. And for everyone listening, if you're serious about building a firm that works without you and that can eventually become an asset you can sell, I hope today's conversation gave you a solid roadmap. So thank you for joining in. Until next time, keep innovating in everything that you do. Cheers.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now